Welcome, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started here today. Just wanted to thank everybody for being here. It looks like we're expecting a few more folks according to the registration list, but I'm going to get started as close to on time as possible and give Kim all of our minutes here. First of all, we just wanted to real quickly thank the sponsors of AFP WNC. So we have UNCA returning as our title sponsor this year, and also generously sponsored by OB Tech, the Community Foundation of Western North Carolina, and Wells Fargo Advisors. And if you would like to have your company or your organization sponsor AFP, we would be glad to hear about it. Wanted to just make a quick plug for upcoming programming. So mark your calendars for Philanthropy Institute coming up in July. So you've got that announcement recently, and there's also information on the website. We'll be sending some more information out soon, shaping up to be a really robust set of workshops, self-care information, maybe a raffle or two in there. So it'd be very exciting. Make sure you mark your calendars for that. I believe that's on July 17th. And then we also have National Philanthropy Day coming up on November 15th, and wanted to make sure to flag for everybody that nominations are now open. So if you know anyone, or maybe if you want to nominate yourself, I think that's okay too. Just put those submissions in, and they're accepting those through the end of the month, end of June. And you can start getting the recognition for the great philanthropers in our community, excuse me. Sorry, I'm keeping an eye on the waiting room list while I'm doing this, but I wanted to take a moment to introduce our presenter, Kim. Thank you for being here today. Kim Hinkelman serves as an instructor for several nonprofit management programs, most recently WNC Nonprofit Pathways and Western Carolina University. She is currently enjoying her consulting work at several nonprofits. She serves on the board of Literacy Connection and chairs the Athena Committee with the Chamber of Commerce in Henderson County. Kim has been a trusted leader, resource, and advocate for nonprofit organizations for over 40 years, and we're lucky to have her with us today to talk about the annual fund. And I'm happy to turn it over to you now, Kim. And welcome and thank you.
Well, thank you. Nice to see everybody. I'm going to share my screen here. Can you all see that? Okay.
Yes, looks good. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. So as we do this, I do have slides and I put a presentation together, but I would much rather have a dialogue and a conversation as we go through this, because quite frankly, all of you, I'm sure, have your own experiences with annual giving, building annual funds. And so as we please, jump in. It's kind of hard as a presenter with Zoom when you're looking at slides and trying to see everybody. So if somebody has something to say and I'm not noticing that you've got a hand up or something, just speak up and interrupt me, okay? If we were in a person-to-person room, we would do the same thing. So I'm listening to Jessica give my introduction, and I'm thinking, a trusted leader for 40 years. So I'm old. That's what that says. I'm old. I've been doing this for a long time. But I want to share, I was on a phone call a couple of nights ago with an account manager with AT&T, working through something. And at one point, and he was actually very helpful, but at one point he said, I need your birthday. So I said 6/27/53. And there was this long pause. And this young man said, wow, I never would have guessed you were that old. And I said, okay. I said, why do you say that? He said, you sound so alert. And so all week I've been chuckling about that I sound alert. And I guess that's a good thing. If you're old, but you're still alert, then that's cool. So today we're going to talk about annual giving. And when I think about annual giving, now why can't here we go. I want to pull it out of kind of the big picture, all the different pieces of fundraising. There's major gift work, there's planned giving work, there's annual giving, There's corporate support, public funding, private foundations, all of those pieces. But today we're really going to focus on building an annual fund. And when I wrote a little descriptor about this, I said the annual fund, unsung hero of fundraising. It is fundamental to a good development program to have a strong annual giving emphasis. Why is that? It's not high profile, it's not big major gifts, it's a lot of smaller gifts. It's not necessarily sexy stuff. It's talking to people about unrestricted gifts to support the organization. But if you don't have that building block, where then do you move people, and how do you get to major gift donors, and how do you get to planned giving if you don't have that fundamental building block of a strong annual fund program? I also would like to say I've always been troubled by the phrase annual giving, because it implies that it's something you do once a year. You know, you get your annual health checkup, your annual bill, your whatever it is. And annual giving is not necessarily just once a year. It's current, it's regular, it's a repeat program. So let's kind of dispel the notion of this being one time a year. So I like to take a couple minutes and just take a look at who are the donors right now. And I love every year the report from Giving USA that gives statistics on who's giving, who's out there, who those folks are. This is from 2020. So that's the last report I've seen. There should be a new report coming out pretty quickly here. But if you look at this first slide, almost 70% of the 470 some billion dollars that were contributed in 2020 came from individuals. So when we zero in on annual giving, and we're talking about those people, 70% of the billions of dollars that came in the door came from individuals. So that's a great source of philanthropy. It doesn't tell us, it doesn't break it down and tell us those individuals are giving online, they're sending in checks, they come to events. It doesn't break it down that far, but it does break it down and tell us about individuals. This next slide talks about where the money goes. I don't think it's a surprise that if the biggest chunk over here, 28% of that money goes to religion. So those are churches, synagogues, different
religious organizations.
So if you think about it, those are individuals who are giving to their religious organizations. But look on there, you can see yourself, you're all from different organizations. I'm sure you can see where you are, whether it's human resources or environmental, animal welfare, all there. This chart talks about changes in individual giving. So I had to look at this for a couple of minutes to figure out what I was looking at. But the brown bar here is the change from 2019 to 2020. And the blue bar is the change from 2018 to 2019. But if you look at individual giving here, in 2018, moving into 2019, 6.7% increase, and 2019 and 2020, 2.2%. Overall, over those 2 years, 9% increase in individual giving. This next chart talks about organizations, again, that, who got the money, and increases. But if you look at health, there was a decrease in 19 moving into 20, and a big decrease in arts and culture in 19 to 20. So I happened to do some work with the Flat Rock Playhouse, and in 2020 they closed down their theater, and so that certainly reflects what happened. These arts and culture organizations had to close their doors, and giving dropped off. And then this one talks about total giving, and just pointing out that there's consistent growth in giving. There's little dips along the way, but basically there's been consistent growth. And this black line with the dots is current dollars, but then there's inflation adjusted dollars. But that's all very good news for those of us in this profession. And then this is a slide that just looked at giving by individuals, which is what we're talking about today. And there has been pretty consistent growth. There was a drop here in 2010, which makes sense because right before that was that recession that we experienced. But overall, over these 40 years, there's been consistent growth by individual giving. And then this, I saw this in the Chronicle not too long ago, and I just thought it was worth mentioning that there is a lot of wealth up there. And look at that increase, more than 50 million, numbers of Americans worth more than $50 million. It's up 75% from 2019. But also the number of Americans worth more than $1 million. There's almost 20 million people in that category. So that's up 25% from 2019. But my point of putting that slide in there is don't be shy about asking for money, because there are individuals out there who have resources, and if you connect with them the right way, they're willing to share that wealth. I'll stop there for a sec. Any observations, any thoughts about any of that before I move on? Okay. Okay, so we got chat here. How many individuals worth more than $1 million live in Buncombe County? That's a very good question. I do not know the answer to that. It'd be worth exploring that. And I don't know if that report, I'd have to go back and look at where they pulled those statistics from. My guess is that report probably breaks it down that way. I have seen a report on the number of millionaires in North Carolina. That's out there, and billionaires. But so Susan, I don't know. Does anybody else have an answer for that? Okay. Can't help you there, Susan. It'd be interesting to know, though, wouldn't it? Okay, so here's the famous pyramid. I'm going to run through a couple of models real quick. And I know some things have changed, but what I think hasn't changed is this basic pyramid, which is the annual giving. 80% of your donors give 20% of the gifts, and they fall in that category. And then the top tier are your major gift donors and people with estate plans in place, planned giving. And that's 20% of your donors giving 80% of your gifts, because obviously they're giving larger gifts. But this next pyramid kind of builds on that. And I like this one because this one talks about some fundraising strategies. So when we talk about annual donors, how do we solicit them? How do we build that fund? What are the strategies? So here's your base of prospects. Annual first-time donors. This one talks about direct mail, telephone solicitation, people who come to an event. I would add social media here. This is an old pyramid and it needs to be updated because social media is clearly a place that people are finding new donors. Using your social media posts, giving people an opportunity to click a button, make a gift, set up a monthly ongoing gift. So I think that's really important to add to this pyramid. But then as you work your way up, so you get your first time donors, then the people who have given their first gift and you want to renew their gift, how do you do that? A letter, a renewal letter, again, a telephone solicitation, and you're beginning to personalize some of that, right? Because now these people are your donors, you can send a more personal letter to folks. And then you upgrade. The next piece of that is upgrading your donor in terms of their level of giving. Well, that requires a little more personal contact and letters and telephone calls. maybe a coffee with them. And then we move into the special and major gift donors, which requires more connections, more face-to-face conversations, and a more personal, relational approach. And then this pyramid is kind of interesting because it talks about relationships. So you've got, again, it's prospects, first-time donors, repeat donors. Those are all the same, but it's over to the side, these I words: identifying people, inviting people. Then you begin to inform people, give them more information. Then you begin to involve them once they've given and they're established. That involvement could be all kinds of things depending on your organization. And then creating more interest, finding out what their affinity is, what do they want to give to within your organization. And then you begin to talk to them about investing in the organization. That's when you're talking to more major donors, and then inspiring people. So that's just another way to kind of slice and dice your pyramid. There's a phrase, DLTV, which is donor long-term value. And so the question is, how do you get strategic and move people from the bottom of that pyramid and that first gift? How do you move them from there all the way to the top? Well, you need to get strategic, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. And you need to spend your time wisely. That's so many of you. I mean, I don't know all of you, but so many of you, I'm sure, wear many hats in a small organization. You're the executive director. You're also the development director. You're also the IT person and the HR person. You're trying to do all these things. And so where do you want to invest your time in donor cultivation? Because you have a limited amount of time. So it's important to get smart about that and focused in terms of who you are spending time with, and be very strategic.
Kim, can you talk
Sure.
more about that a little bit? I'm just curious, some good strategies for like doing your research on donors, and identifying the ones that you do want to spend time with. Besides just like a gut feeling about their interest in the organization.
Sure.
What other types of research can we do?
Well, I think it's a great question. So if you are fortunate enough to work in an organization that has the financial resources, there are wealth screening programs available, which I think gives really good information and an indication to you if you do a wealth screening and somebody's capacity is $1,000 a year, according to those programs. And it's not perfect. Those wealth screens are not perfect, but they're indicators. But so you look at somebody and you think, okay, well, that strategy for that person is I'm going to keep them on my mailing list, and twice a year they're going to get an appeal to make a gift. If somebody's capacity is larger than that, they're going to be on my list of people that at some point over the next 6 months, I'm going to have coffee with them and reach out to them so that begins to be a personal connection. So I think the strategy revolves around where you see them on this pyramid. Part of it is gut, part of it is what you know about them, part of it might be just looking at their giving record. What have they been doing, right? Part of it could be, and I think you can do this, I think you have to be careful because it's confidential, but I think you can look at do you know their circle of friends, or is there somebody on the board that knows that person? Like if you're looking at your records and you see somebody who gives every single year and they've been giving you $500 for 10 years. Do you know that? Have you ever met that person? Do you know that person? Because a lot of these annual fund donors, I mean, my experience at Party Hospital when I was there, I didn't know all those people because there were hundreds of people in that database. But what's the pattern of giving? So if their pattern of giving is consistent, but it's never changed and it's never grown, then that becomes a key person for me to go talk to. And so it's time consuming. I mean, I'll be really honest with you, this is very time consuming to figure out, who you need to invest your time in. And the research component of that, it can be very informal in terms of looking at their record, talking to people who might know them, and then just going to talk to them. What can you learn about that person in a conversation? Or it can be formal, which is use a wealth screening program that then begins to kind of slice and dice for you. Here's some major gift opportunities. Here's your annual, this person needs to stay in that annual fund lane, which is less time intensive, but don't lose track of them. And this group of people, you should be talking to them about a planned gift because of their age, their demographic. I don't know. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you. I was also curious if you know how much those wealth screening programs cost, what the subscription is.
Well, there's a lot of them. And so you can, what database are you using? Donor database?
Or like CRM?
Yeah.
We use Donor Perfect.
Okay. So I know that, like, I just recently was involved with an organization that uses Bloomerang, and part of Bloomerang has a wealth screening tool embedded in it, which was kind of cool.
It's expensive. It's like $600 for a very base model and more for the full-on donor wealth screening.
But it is donor search.
It is donor search.
And, donor search links to a lot of different programs, and it's about, depending on how many donors you have, about $2,500 a year. They want to get you to do a multiple year contract, but and then there's still Wealth Engine out there, but you just do a contract for X number of files and get basic profiles and more profiles.
Right.
But
well, and I think all of them, Wealth Engine is one that's out there, which is also pretty pricey. But they're all based on number of records, right? And do you screen all of your records like one time and pay for that? Or do you have an ongoing relationship and a contract so that you can, like after an event, screen all the people who came to the event and there's your 10 people that you want to follow up with?
We had a great way to save money on wealth screening. We have a retired professional development officer. It's just a volunteer for Riverlink, and I can send him a list of 5 or 8 or 10 names that I need a little more information on, and he'll do a pretty deep Google search that produces an estimate of their capacity, just looking at their property records and other donations they've made to local organizations. And the value of that is how local it is. Donor search is, of course, a national search. So you're paying a lot of money for something that might not produce the kind of results you really need here locally.
Thank you, Susan. I think that's great because all these search companies, they're doing exactly what your volunteer is doing, but they do it on a bigger scale. You're really blessed to have a volunteer who's willing to spend time doing that. And there are people who love doing that kind of stuff. And it's all public records. I mean, these wealth screening tools are not getting any information from any place that you and I can't do it. It's time. It's all about time, right? And so you're lucky to have a volunteer willing to do that. It's a great thing to explore. You all could do it a little bit. You could do Google search, and if there's a particular volunteer or particular donor you're interested in, you could devote some time to just figuring out, where to go, what you can find out about that person. The other program I just recently became aware of was something called iWave, capital I, capital WAVE. and it's very user friendly. And it's a tool that the Playhouse is using right now because it talks to their database. But it's been really helpful, and you don't have to have these contracts go on and on and on. You could budget for it 1 year and do a major screening 1 year, and it gives you some baseline information on the current group of volunteers that you have. So I would just suggest if you Google search wealth screening engine, you're going to get lots of programs that are out there to take a look at.
One component that donor search does have that it's not, it depends on how many records you've used. So let's say you've got 2,000 records total they're going to give you. If you just give them zip codes in your area that you want to research, and you pick out 4 or 5 different categories for those people in the zip codes, and they've given to something. It may not just be the arts, it may be 4 or 5 different things. So you get an indicator if they've given, and you get these lists by zip code and address, and you may know 10 people on that list right off the bat, or you can use it for mailings, or and it's not an additional cost to the contract. And iWave may have that too.
Yeah.
I know Western Carolina uses, well, they have Blackbaud, so they use Donor Search, Wealth Engine, iWave, and one other thing because they have the resources.
Or call Susan's volunteer.
Yeah, oh, yeah. I think using volunteers is you just have to be comfortable doing that. They can do the work. They can do.
Yeah,
they can help you.
You all have volunteers who love your organization and love your mission, and they're the best ones to do this research for you.
Yep. I think it's a great idea. Okay, great question, great conversation. Let's move here a little bit. Okay, so where might donors come from, right? If none of you are starting from scratch if you're already in an organization because you already have donors, but where basically do they come from? So the first one on here says acquisition. Well, one way to acquire donors is to buy lists. And I know organizations that have done that. They buy a list, and say you're an organization that's in the humanities, you can buy a list that has to do with people who have given to the arts or the humanities. It costs money. I mean, there's no doubt about it. You got to pay to buy a list, but that's one way if you're trying to kind of juice up your prospects, right? And begin to build more of an annual fund base, then that's one way to think about doing that. Another way to do acquisition, and again, this is just using volunteers, but I don't know about you all, but I go to other people's events. I've done that for years because you want to support other organizations and community events. I go to the symphony. I bring that program home and start going through it. And number one, I go through it and go, well, okay, there's my donor from my organization giving more money to that organization. I should explore that a little bit. But you also go through it and find who are other sponsors in your community, who are some of the folks who are big supporters or underwriters for programs. Is there an affinity and a connection to your organization? So that's another way to acquire new names, new lists, is to just do your own digging and research. Another way to do that is to utilize your current board, your volunteers, your donors. Ask them to provide you with 5 new names. None of this is all that unique or, oh my God, that's a great idea. But I think we forget sometimes that we've got these loyal people involved with our organizations as volunteers, as board members, as donors. Ask them to be ambassadors. Ask them to expand the network of people supporting the organization. Maybe once a year have a, friends campaign where everybody gives you 5 new names and then you do a solicitation that way. So that's all about acquiring new donors. Somebody started to say something. Okay. The second piece then is renewal. So those are folks who have already made a gift somewhere along the line. And I would invest some energy there because they're already your donors. You've got their information in your database. And so asking them to renew their gift, whether you do that, in a annual way, like once a year, or you do it when their last gift was made and you say, a year ago you made this gift, won't you please make another gift? I think it's important, and this goes along with upgrade. I think it's important when you're going back to somebody who's already been a donor that you always ask them to increase their gift, whether that's just a general statement, would you consider increasing your gift this year? Or you do a letter and you plop in some specific data points, name, address, but you can add a field that says, will you consider making a gift this year of this much, and do some kind of calculation, like give them a number that's a 10% increase over last year, but put a specific number out there in front of people to consider. And if they're a person who's been given $100 and you ask them to increase their gift to $110, more than likely it's not a big jump, and they'll do it because you've populated that number in there. So I think investing energy in people who you're renewing their gift, you're upgrading their gift, that's the best. When you're talking about efficiency and effectiveness, I think those two categories are where you invest your time, and it's going to be the most productive for you in terms of return on your investment. And then the last one is lapsed donors, and there's a lot of conversation about that whole live month thing they gave last year, but unfortunately not this year. How long do you keep people on your mailing list? How long do you keep sending renewal letters or appeals or end of the year appeals? How long do you keep bearing that expense before you say, okay, I'm going to not spend money? And as postage goes up, and if you're doing mailing programs, it's very expensive. I gave 10 years ago, my husband's nephew was playing softball for Kent State University, and they did a fundraiser, and he obviously had to turn in relatives' names and addresses, and we sent maybe $50 to support the baseball team. To this day, I still get an end of the year appeal from those people. And I've actually called and said, take me off the list because I'm never giving you more money. I gave you money when my nephew was there. So I think it's something for you to think about in your own organization. How long is enough? I don't know if you all have thoughts about that. Do any of you do you feel like you keep sending mail to lapsed donors and get nothing back? Is that an issue, or are you good about just saying, nope, they're done, 3 years, I'm taking them off the list?
Well, it might, if somebody can in their organization run the live bunt report, just take a look at it and say, okay, here's some people I know give to somebody else, and maybe it's worth a different kind of letter that says, we appreciate your involvement in our work, and would like to know how we can further engage you, or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we give a really different letter to a side bunt, someone who gave some year, but unfortunately not this year, and a live bunt, because a live bunt's just a much more recent engagement, and we tend to assume they're still kind of engaged with our mission in their minds if they're a live bunt.
Yeah, or side bunt reports. I mean, the two things just to look at and not necessarily jump into mailing or whatever strategy you have.
Yeah.
I'll quit talking.
Yeah, I would say 3 years has been kind of our limit lately with how long we keep them on the list. Although we had a lot of changes in the organization, and with COVID, that sort of influenced our thinking. We were thinking, maybe people were giving less during COVID, or So we went back a little bit further, but I would say right around now, we've been like getting back to kind of our normal
Yeah.
3-year limit.
Yep. Okay. Well, and there's no, right or wrong here. I think it's just what you're comfortable with in your own organization, but it's worth investigating. It's worth thinking about, right? So here's a little bit of math, because I think I said that we're going to talk about math a little bit. So increase the number of your donors. There's 2 ways to increase your annual fund. One is increase the number of your donors and increase the average gift. Makes a whole lot of sense, right? So increasing the number of your donors, expand your solicitation pool. We've already touched on that. Ask more people. If you ask 50 more people, you're going to increase the number of donors. And the other way to increase that is to increase the number of times you ask. Who's really good at this? Universities are really good at this, because the minute you make a gift, you hear from them to make another gift. And you kind of get to the point, I've gotten to the point where I forget. It's like, didn't I already send the Ohio State University a check for the scholarship? And you kind of lose track, because universities just ask and ask and ask. And universities, when they have a capital campaign, as soon as one is done, they do another one.
I'd appreciate it if you do it.
What?
Sorry, I need to mute.
Oh, okay. I think the other thing about increasing the number of times you ask is think about adding solicitations to other vehicles. It's not just a letter necessarily, or an e-blast or an e-letter, but are you adding solicitation opportunities to your marketing materials, to your newsletters, to displays, to social media? When you put a social media post out there, does it always include an opportunity to click a button and make a donation? Because social media is one of those things where it's in the moment. You're reading it, you want to respond. So make sure you're giving people the vehicle to respond in the moment, so that they don't have to go through 3 steps, and by then they've forgotten about it and they moved on to something else. So increase the number of times you ask, increase the ways you ask. Where's my little marker here? And ask smarter. So have a very clear case for support. Be very clear about what you're asking people to do, why you need their gift. Embed a percentage increase in a letter, a renewal letter. All of those are ways to ask smarter to increase your number of donors. And if you do that, a higher percentage of your prospects might become donors, because that's the whole point of this, is you identify prospects, but how do you then get them to give that first gift? Then the second way to increase your annual fund is to increase the average gift. So ask for more, increase your expectations. I've never had a donor, I think I can say this, I've never had a donor get offended because I ask for too much money. They'll say, oh my gosh, I can't do that, or I was thinking about something else, or in an annual appeal, they'll respond with a smaller gift. But it's okay to ask them. It's okay to ask people to step up. Don't be shy about that. And then again, ask smarter. Determine who your most capable and willing donors are. Ask the right people. Invest your time in going back to the whole wealth screening, and whether it's informal or formal, invest your time in people who are capable to give more, right? And also the methodology around how you're asking. Are you talking about the future? Are you telling them a story? Are you making some kind of emotional connection for people? Those are all methods to explore in terms of how you ask for a gift. And then the other thing is to expand your pyramid. So just focusing on those first-time annual donors, expand the pool. We've already talked a little bit about that, but really, I think spending some time brainstorming with your team, with your board, with your development committee, with your volunteers, how do we expand that pool of those first-time donors? And then, of course, it's the same for once you get that first-time donor in the door, how do you ask smarter? How do you focus your message so that your first-time donors become repeat donors? And then, of course, leadership and major donors, but that's for another day. Having good data is important. You don't necessarily have to have a fancy database, CRM, whatever you're using. If you're a small organization, and I always say this because I used to get frustrated going to webinars and seminars and AFP programs when it sounded great, but I'm in this little tiny organization going, we don't have money to spend on a really fancy program or a database. Well, you can track basic information in a spreadsheet, a name, address, where they're employed, add columns as you learn things. That's okay. Just track something, right? Begin to track something. And then you could add to that attendance, emails, how they're interacting with you on social media. All those things are important as you get more sophisticated, but don't get frustrated and think that you've got to have some big fancy program to do that. You decide what's important for you to track as an organization, gather it, start with a spreadsheet, but keep track of it, right? Using whatever tool that you have. Then as you create this database, whatever that looks like, make sure that it's accurate. So one thing is every once in a while, you can run your spreadsheet, your data information through that NCOA, which is the National Change of Address, and they'll screen your whole database for you and then give you kick back all your bad addresses. Because if you're spending money mailing to bad addresses, then you're wasting money, right? I set an alarm so that I would stop talking at a particular moment. Anyway, from the post office, the statistic I saw was 25 to 30 million people move every year. So statistically, some of those people are your people. And 5% of all mail is undeliverable. So it's worth really taking a hard look at your database and add the return address requested on every mailing so that you're getting information back from the post office so that you can update your database and kick out bad addresses. You could use an intern, you could use a volunteer to do some of that for you, but it's pretty important to do that from time to time. You can also do a telephone number research. That's a pretty low cost kind of thing to do. So anyway, all of this is about improving the accuracy of your data so that you're much more efficient in terms of using your financial resources to do some of this. You really don't like to see a stack of mail come back with bad addresses because you've spent money on postage to do that. Okay, this last little piece here, and then I'm going to stop and we can answer questions and talk about anything you want to talk about. Ask more people. We've talked about that, but where are some of those people? So this is obviously a hospital piece, which is patients and parents of patients, but your organizations all have clients, consumers, connections. So look at that group. Are you touching all those people? Are all those people in your database? A special event. So people pay to come to a special event. The attendees, if they bring guests, do you spend time trying to get their guests' names and addresses so that you can add them to your database? Your volunteers, staff, affiliated staff, board members, all of those folks are really important. And are you soliciting them every year? You know, a lot of times people will say, well, you know, your volunteers already give so much of their time. I would say to you, it's harder to get people to volunteer their time than to make a gift. So you've already done the hard part. You've got them connected as a volunteer. Their heart is connected. Don't hesitate to ask them also to make a financial gift on top of that. Increase the number of times you ask. I already talked about that. Here's just some suggestions. Your leadership, you can ask your leadership 3 to 5 times a year to make a gift, maybe for different projects, maybe in different ways. Maybe ask them to make a 2-year pledge, which is a stretch gift. Potential leadership, are you tapping new people on committees that maybe could become board members? Are all those folks included in your annual fund program? Renewals, lapse donors, long lapse donors. This says give it a shot 1 or 2 times, and I think you begin to cut that mailing list off. And then your second gift appeal is really important. I already talked about this. How are you using your website? And I do like the idea of the language on your website. We all know what foundation is. We know what it means when we say, would you support us? But the word giving is a really important word, because that's people understand what that means, that you're asking them to give. And so go back and look at your website and make sure that it's easy to use. I used to, before my dad died, I used to send a link to my dad and say, would you look at this and see how easy it is for you to make a gift? Because he was an older person, and it was good intel for me, because he would get tripped up different places. So your website should be an option for responding. So are you driving your donors to your website so that they can make a gift? Is that on your social media posts? Are you driving people to your website? Ask smarter. So what is your case for support? Storytelling is really powerful, and anymore it's so easy to do quick little 1-minute videos on an iPhone that you can post on social media, that you can put on your website, that you can swap out. And then peer-to-peer, I have to say, I really believe so strongly that effective fundraising has to be about the relationship you're developing with your donors. How many people are you out there visiting? And I know, again, I'll say, time is really precious, and it's hard when you're trying to pay bills or you're trying to do 15 other things to carve out an afternoon to go visit with a couple of donors. I would say, though, that the future of your organization and the future of your fundraising stability requires you to do that. And so carve out on your calendar, this is the day I've carved out to do these things, and set up appointments to go visit with people, especially people that you've identified have the capacity to grow into a major donor. So work that annual giving group and figure out who those folks are that you need to be visiting with. Segmentation is important. How do you divide out let's say it's the end of the year appeal? Are there different people that get different messaging, and figure out a way to do that? It's really easy anymore to do those things, but that's an important way to ask smarter. Your segments should have unique messaging depending on who the people are that you're sending it to. And I always think this is important to say, how do you connect what's in the heart of your donor with the mission of your organization? And most importantly, listen to what they're telling you. When you have an opportunity to sit and talk to a donor, we all think we have to talk a lot, and we get nervous about that, and we kind of have it scripted, and we know we're going to ask them for a gift and all that stuff. What we forget is engage them in the conversations. So ask a couple questions and then sit back and listen to, because they'll tell you lots of things if you're quiet and let them talk. And one of the things you want to find out is where that intersection is between their heart, their philanthropic interest, and your mission. So I'm going to zip over here, because if Alex were here, he would have cut me off 27 times. But one of the things we've done, and I'll give credit to Myra Grant because she was my predecessor at Party. We built an annual fund plan, and this is basically a spreadsheet. There's nothing fancy about this. It's a spreadsheet, but we really went through all of our different programs and the way we communicated with donors, the way we sent appeals out, and kind of built that out for a whole year so that we're really clear about what we were doing. And we were a staff of 3 people. It's not like we had a whole stable of people doing this, but this just really kept us on track with we mapped it out so that we knew when we needed to be preparing the letter, when we were making phone calls, when we got the board involved, when we were sending out a newsletter. And I would encourage you, however you want to do that, map it out for yourself, have a plan in place, make it simple, but that way everybody's kind of on the same page and you're moving together in the same direction. And this was very helpful to our group to do it this way.
Some people are just visual and they like these chevrons.
Yeah.
Um,
And color.
and color.
Okay, so I'm going to stop share. I told Jessica I would be happy to share the slides, so I'll send that to her and shoot them off to you guys if there's stuff in there that's helpful to you. But I'll stop. I think we've probably got about 5 minutes here. If you have any questions or thoughts or things that have been successful for you in the annual fund world that you want to share with the group. Julie says, what software do you use for the plan?
So where is the?
It's an Excel spreadsheet. That plan you just looked at. I'm not very fancy, and Myra wasn't very fancy in terms of how she set that up. So it's just
Somebody set it up for me.
oh well, there you go.
I mean, some wizard in there did that. You know?
Yeah, it's just
But it linked back to an Excel spreadsheet.
right.
Ours is an Excel spreadsheet too, and it just uses dates.
Well,
Kind of spread across from left to right. The whole year is mapped out from left to right in a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
I have to hop off, but I want to thank my friend Kim Hinkelman. I can say that because when someone follows you in an organization, you don't always get to be their friend, but we've been great buddies, and I'm going to say happy early birthday.
Oh well, thank you, thank you, thanks, Myra. So any feedback, any thoughts? Was this helpful?
I keep attending trainings because I like to learn. And there are 2 volunteers. I think both volunteers were on this call that I encouraged to sit in. And I think that we could all do that for these programs and not be afraid to have volunteers learn as well. But I expected it to be great, and it was.
Goodbye, Myra.
Bye. See ya.
Anybody else? All right. Let's see. Jim, I just realized I don't have a camera. Right, we wondered where you were, Jim. Quarterly, I suggest quarterly mailings to everyone who gives in that quarter, including live bonds with a personalized reply card with pre-printed ask amounts or QR code to drive them online. Great idea, and you're absolutely right. Using QR codes is pretty cool. That's a new piece that is very helpful for people. And the more you can personalize things, the better. The more you can personalize a reply card that's self-populated with their name, address, and gift amount, that's great. That works really well.
I don't have a microphone either, I guess.
No, we can hear you.
Oh, good.
Yeah, no, we can hear you.
Okay. Well, yeah, I've done that at my previous organization, and the response rates went from, 2 or 3% up to 9 to 11%, depending on the quarter. And I would still get envelopes at the end of the year, even if I mailed it in the second quarter of the year, because they hold on to them. Even those, they like those pre-printed personalized cards. They really like them. They can just check it off, and there's always boxes issued, update contact information, anything. They just send it right in.
Yep.
With an envelope.
Okay, so
There's
now,
plate stamp here.
so now that you're talking, I know who Jim is. I didn't know that's who you were before. So Jim worked with me at Pardee and was part of that annual plan that we laid out, and it worked really well. And yes, personalizing things is extremely helpful.
Mhm.
What Julie asked, what's the common understanding of including past few gifts and solicitations? Julie, say more about that question. You mean acknowledging the gifts that when you send a new solicitation, you acknowledge the gift they have just given? It's in the last 3 gifts. Well, I think it's good to acknowledge past gifts because it reminds them of what they've done. Absolutely. And if you can then, in a way to motivate them to step up and give more, building on what they've done in the past, I think that's a good thing. Yep, updating them. I do think people need to be reminded of what they've done.
Mhm.
I really do.
Rob, did you have your hand up?
It's a sort of a strange question. My background is in magazine subscriptions and solicitations and renewals. And there's a conventional wisdom there that, for instance, if someone subscribes in January, you renew them in January because you have to respect their own way of dealing with things. Things have obviously changed a lot, but is there a conventional wisdom that if you get a new donor via mail, that you want to keep them in mail because that's how they respond, and that you reduce, it's a question, do you reduce response when you try to convert them over to online, for instance?
Well, I think that's a great question. And that's something I've been talking to this team at the Playhouse about is how do we convert people, because the people at the Playhouse are a young crowd, and so they want to drive everything through social media. And I keep saying, but you've got a whole group of donors, they don't even have email, let alone using social media. So you have to respect where they are, and that's always going to have to be a hard copy invitation, a hard copy letter. They're going to send you a check. They're not going to give online. And so I think it's up to us to kind of understand who those people are. I don't think it's a bad idea, though, in a renewal letter to say, if you would like, give them the option of moving to an online response or an e-news or an e-letter. And I think at party, like every 3 or 4 years, I remember sending out a postcard one time to a group of people saying, let us know how you'd like to hear from us. Right? Because there's people who want to hear from you more frequently. There's people who would rather you make a phone call and go have coffee with them. And the more you get to know your donors, the more you're going to know what their style is and what they prefer, right? But I don't think it's a bad idea to give them options. And then, but I don't think you can just automatically push people into a different way of giving because it's easier for you. I don't think that's appropriate. That help? That
Yep.
makes sense? Anything else? Because I think our time's up here, but I appreciate all of you being here today. Thank you for listening and joining in.
Thank you, Kim. Really appreciate it. I learned a lot. I also wanted to correct something I said earlier in the opening remarks that Philanthropy Institute is actually taking place on July 13, not whatever date I told you earlier. So hope to see everybody there. Kim, thanks again. And we'll forward to seeing everybody at next month's program.